right, let's get started then. So, hi everyone, my name is Angela Chen and welcome to our UI UX workshop. First, let me tell you a little bit about Project Tech Conferences, or PTC. As an organization, we set up events like this to encourage people to learn more about technology and promote digital literacy. We also set up conferences to dive deep into specific topics within tech and get speakers in the field to come share their experiences and opinions. Before we get started, I just want to let you know that if you ever need help throughout the workshop, you can press the raise hand option or type a message in the chat. We also want to let everyone know that this is a recorded event, so make sure to keep your microphone and video off. With that said, let's get into the presentation. Many students who may not be as familiar or interested in the software or hardware aspects of CS often do not have the chance to explore other options in the field, and this workshop will help them to start up a portfolio. The goal of this workshop is to educate and generate interest in the emerging and increasingly popular field of UI UX, also known as user interface and user experience in the tech industry. Our agenda for today is first to talk about user experience, then user design, then an overview of concepts and good practices within UI and UX. This will be followed by a guest speaker, Taha Hussein, and a Q&A session.
Some of you might be wondering, what does UX even stand for? Well, it stands for user experience, which is how the user uses and interacts with the product. It is a person's attitudes and emotions about a particular product, system, or service. Careful consideration is required on how the product will be used by the consumer because designers want to ensure that people have a good experience using the product. This could range from anything between a chair, door, mobile app, website, and so much more. These design principles have been around for a while, but in recent years, we have seen a surge in ensuring people have a good experience on digital platforms. User experience draws from human psychology research about the market and trends, human-computer interaction, and so on. All this is taken into account when creating a product. What might be a great way of interaction with a certain group of people could be completely unintuitive for another group, and designers need to be able to identify that. A designer wants to make sure the experience is as smooth as possible for the user. This means being easy to navigate, satisfying expectations, having a logical flow, etc. It is a very user-centered process relating to the user's emotions, needs, and a focus on accessibility. Now it's time for an activity. Grab a pen and a paper and draw a cup. It could be any cup, but do it from a UX designer's perspective. Think about what things need to be taken into consideration. We'll stick a couple things that you might want to consider into the chat.
And we'll give you guys about 2 minutes for this activity.
Okay, 2 minutes is up. So that concludes our little introduction to UX. So now let's talk a little bit about UI. UI stands for user interface. This refers to how the product looks and how it's laid out. It is a little more centered in the digital product, where UX is found commonly in both physical and digital products. This includes screen layout, transitions, interface animations, visual elements, and micro interactions. Some examples of this are button boxes, buttons, boxes, color schemes, and a lot more. The bottom line of a UI designer is that the product is unified in the way it looks. In other words, the product has a theme. Everything from the application should look like it belongs there. Time for another activity. Go to this link. It will be sent in the chat. Try to complete the form as fast as possible. While doing it, think about the form from a UI designer's perspective. Is it a good example of UI or UX? Why or why not? We'll give you 3 minutes for this. There's about 1.5 minutes left. Ten seconds left to try and finish that form. Okay, 3 minutes are up. How many of you completed the form? To answer some questions we asked before, this is a bad example of design. One of the main indicators of this is the amount of frustration it creates. Now let's look at this design. Is it a good example of UX and UI? Yes. Some answers to why this is a good example is that it's easy to interpret the arrow indicating to go to the right. There's a good amount of white space between sections. It's neat and clear. And we can also expect a hamburger menu to appear from the top from the icon.
Let's dive into some UI fundamentals and terminology. First, let's start by talking a little bit about whitespace. Which of these two options looks better? Well, the right is definitely easier on the eyes. But why is that? Whitespace. As you can see, it makes all the difference. Also known as negative space is a space that is not occupied, whether it is by text, an image, or anything else. In other words, the area between design elements, spaces where there are no user interface or specific content. Contrary to what the name suggests, white space does not have to be white. Spacing out elements allows the content to pop out more and does not strain our eyes when we are trying to look at something or concentrate on a specific part of an interface. White space should be kept equal in some instances, like the image on the bottom right. Now let's move on to color. Colors can set the mood, tone, concept, and connotations for a brand or a product. It plays a big role in forming big first impressions. Research from QuickSprout shows that 90% of product assessment has to do with color. There are three important things to consider when discussing color. Hue is the color in its natural state without any variation of darkness or light. They are the colors you see on the color wheel. Value is the amount of darkness or light a color has. When it has a value of 0%, the result will be black, and when it has a value of 100%, the result will be white. Saturation is the intensity of the color. The higher the saturation, the more intense and vivid the color is. If it has a lower saturation, it will be duller. Each color has a unique meaning. For example, white conveys a sense of freedom, purity, and cleanliness, and etc. Which of these logos spikes your appetite the most? Type it in the chat below. When choosing a color, we want to ensure that there is contrast and harmony. This will make it appealing to look at and attract viewers. Opposite colors have contrast, while close colors have harmony. Here are some common ways of choosing. Complementary colors are direct opposites on the color wheel. Analogous colors are right beside each other, and triadic form a triangle on the color wheel. Split complementary entails complementary, but instead of direct opposite, we use the analogous colors on either side of the complementary color. Square creates a square on the color wheel. Rectangle creates a rectangle, or similar to the split complementary, but instead of leaving one complementary color, you use its analogous colors too. Here are some links to tools to help you create color palettes. They will be posted in the chat too. Now let's move on to typography.
So there are vocabulary terms to recognize in this topic. Firstly, there is an X height, which is the height of the typical lowercase letter X. This is the height of the majority of the lowercase character we read. Base line is the invisible line at the bottom of the character body. Likewise, the accelerator line is the invisible line at the top of the character body. Serif is the decorative stroke that finishes off the letter stem. The weight means the thickness of the typed character. Canning is the spacing between two neighboring letters. Checking is the space between two individual blocks of text. And finally, line length is the total number of the characters on the line. There are also other terms in the photo above, such as the counters, which is the area of the character that is partially enclosed or completely enclosed, also known as open counter and closed counter. Now I will introduce you all to some typical typography rules. First, you should use one or maximum two typefaces to make the content easier to read, without being distracted by identifying different characters in various typefaces. Secondly, you should use two or maximum three ways, with most fonts containing 8 ways, ranging from ultra thin to heavy, having black. Please only pick a few purposefully. Do make not your design too busy with various ways. For example, bold for title, regular for body, and medium for bottoms. The next rule is avoid using black and ultra thin ways. They may look stylish, but they are really harder to read. The fourth and final rule is align big lock to the of text to the left. Left alignment of text is the most comfortable one to read, but you can use center alignment to differentiate some portion of content. For example, with the quote or shorter contents, and avoid using the right alignment in a big part of content, especially avoid using just justified alignment. As it causes different spacing between words, it makes difficult to read. There are a few typography rules we thought were most important to keep in mind, but there are more out there. This gives you an idea of how much thought is actually put into the design. Now, let's move on to the visual hierarchy. Visual hierarchy actually have a few laws, so I will go through them now. With the simplicity, the time to acquire a target is a function of the distance inside of the target. With the hit class, the time it takes to make a decision increase with the number and complexity of choice. With the Miller laws, the average person can only keep about 7 items in their working memory. Aesthetically pleasing design are perceived as more usable to the user. The law of common reason is elements tend to perceive into group if they share an area with clearly defined boundary. Next is the law of proximity. That means objects are near each other tend to group together. The last one is the law of similarity. Similar elements are perceived as a complete picture even they are separate. Go to the different category. We will introduce you some scanning patterns. We have two types of pattern. The first one is F pattern, which means the user start by scanning the upper part of the content area. They move down to read across the shorter horizontal line for any element that stands out. And lastly, scan the content left side in the vertical movement for keywords. It's used to create a more balanced visual hierarchy and increase the engagement. The second one is Z pattern. The user starts by scanning upper part of the content in the horizontal line. They move down to left diagonally and lastly across the right at the bottom. UX fundamentals. Let's go to find out UX term. First, what a persona is. A persona is a simple tool used to ensure you are creating your product with a specific target user in mind rather than the generic one. It is a representation of target audience goal and desire with user of your product, which can be gathered through the user interviews. And creating a persona will ensure your product is as useful as possible by answering questions like, who is my ideal customer? What are the needs and goals of my user? And what issue do my user run into the current solution? A persona has 4 elements. That is name, photo, description, and problem. Let's find out name. Personas have names which make it easier to discuss their desired outcome and goal with your development team. Then photo is to add a photo of your fictional persona, preferably one that represents the problem your product is trying to address. For example, your persona could be an older man with glasses, which might remind you that you have to keep accessible for the older individual in mind when designing your app. Next is the description. That is some background about your fictional persona, as well as their reasoning for using your application. Last with the problem. Each persona should represent a problem that your product is trying to solve. When checking up your process, always make sure your user problem is being solved. A prototype is an early sample of design used to get feedback and rapid experience with a new idea. This can include any early vision of your product, but typically they are the close to finalized design. Create using the wireframe and sketch from the earlier step and represent the design and flow your application in its early stage. So why is it important? Prototyping is important because it gives the developers the opportunity to get feedback on their design early and quickly. When it is still easy to make changes to the product. This way it limits the extent involved with development. You are able to test your design concept and usability. One from early prototyping involved creating wireframe. Wireframe is a skeleton of your user interface. It is a lower fidelity sketch for the UI. Wireframes convey the main feature, function, and content for the user interface without getting into the visual design. Wireframe come before the prototyping process. It serves as a way for your client to verify all the feature content that they want to include in your sketch. A wireframe is the best way to test idea and fail forward with the minimum of effort. There are a bunch of benefits that include minimizing reward and revision when it's difficult to change things, facilitate license and stakeholder feedback, get the user experience right from the get-go, start defining and validating requirements. Storyboarding works on the flip side. In the UX term of the UI side, it's a tool that helps you visually predict and explore your user experience with your product. It also makes developers understand how people would flow through their product and try to plan to give them the best experience possible. The main components of the storyboard include scenario that describe the scenario of user story you are trying to convey through the storyboard. Visuals, each step of the scenario is represent visual using sketch and or photos. Caption is caption the verb serves the design, describe the user action, environment, emotion state, and anything else that relevant to the story. Captions should be concise. Why should storyboards be used? They help provide additional context to team and stakeholders. Because of their easy to understand format, they are convenient to convey your message. They also help developers empathize with the user and putting them into the user's shoes. A UX sitemap is a hierarchical diagram for the website or application that shows how the page are appropriate, link, and label. If a user's flow is like the script view detail, the sitemap is like the bird's eye view. The sitemaps are used early in UX design process so that you can plan for usability on a new website. It provides a big picture which can help developers simplify their sites and only keep what's important. UX sitemap can also help organize your site in a way that makes it easier for your user to read any page that they could like. Sitemap typically look like this. They show each page and how each page is connected to the others using the links in the tree structure. It starts up with the high-level category at the top to more specific page near the bottom.
Now let's move on to UX modern patterns. A key term to understand when learning about some UX modern patterns is navigation design, which is the discipline of creating, analyzing, and implementing ways for users to navigate through a website or app. It plays an integral or essential role in how users interact with and use products. It is how your user can get from point A to point B, and even point C, in the least frustrating way possible. Being able to create a good navigation design can enhance your users' understanding, make them feel more confident when using your product, and many more positive outcomes. Here's an example of good navigation design, the sliding hamburger menu navigation. Many of you have probably seen this before on applications or websites that you use. In its resting position, the slide menu appears to be hidden, but when the user presses the hamburger icon, they can access the uncovered navigation links. This is a great way to make a mobile screen decluttered for the user's optimal viewing experience. Now, let's take a look at a case study. Should bottom navigation be a norm for mobile web pages? Think about it. Phone sizes have gotten much larger over the past few years. When you're trying to use one hand, for example, tapping a button at the top is nearly impossible and requires a lot of stretching on your part. Designers need to keep in mind the most comfortable way for the user to maneuver their products. Here you can see what applications like Slack and Reddit would look like if it were to follow this idea. The Uber app actually implemented this idea for their search bar, which is the most important part of their application. Here is another example of navigation design, the tab bar for mobile applications. This is a very popular design for many applications, especially for social media. This design definitely makes it easier on the thumbs for the user and makes it much faster to switch between the features. Some of the most important rules to keep in mind when designing a tab bar are never have more than 5 features, communicate the user's current location using a different color, and ensure that the transitions are smooth and the tab bar stays in the same place throughout the application. Now let's move on to our third example of navigation design, headers and navigation bars with drop-down menus. On the slide, we have listed a few good practices for navigation bars. The navigation bar should allow a user to land on any page of the site and find exactly what they need within 3 clicks. You should make links or hypertext obvious so that the user knows to click on it. Streamline navigation by not putting too many links that might overwhelm your users. You should keep the navigation bar in a standard place throughout the site. It should ensure that users know which page they are currently on, maybe by adding a different color on the current location, like I mentioned before. Now on to our fourth and final example, footer styling. To ensure a good and useful footer, you need to make sure that there are no more than 2 levels of information hierarchy. Link names in the footer are easily understood. Use clear names like contact us rather than help. And that you use clear and legible font sizes and colors. Do not hide or collapse the footer on your site. These rules help to make the footer seem less cluttered and less confusing for the user.
Now let's discuss accessibility. Accessibility is concerned with whether all users are able to access an equivalent user experience, however they encounter a product or service. Like usability, which we have been discussing throughout the presentation, accessibility focuses on people with disabilities. For example, designers need to keep in mind that there are people who are colorblind, so they need to design their website or application so that accessibility doesn't depend on whether someone is able to see the colors. Another example is that designers should use less crowded and larger fonts for those with dyslexia. There are a few more great examples listed on the slide, such as motor and mobility concerns, auditory, which is hearing difficulties, seizures, especially photosensitive epilepsy, and like mentioned before, learning or cognitive factors. So now it's time for our guest speaker, Taha Hossein, to give you guys a presentation. And before we get started, I just wanted to let you all know that if you at any moment during his presentation had any questions, feel free to answer in the chat or pose your question in the chat, and we will keep track of them. And at the end, after his presentation, we will discuss those questions. And for those of you who joined later and didn't have a chance to do our activities at the beginning, we'll be going back there first before we head on to the presentation. So here was the first mini activity, and we'll give about 2 minutes.
Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Oh, okay. Are you guys still going on with the workshop?
Yeah. So we're just going to allow some of those who missed the beginning of the workshop to participate in one more mini activity, and then we'll move on to your presentation.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, we'll get started with the presentation in 1 more minute. All right, Taha, take it away. Thank you so much for joining us today. And like said before, if you ever have any questions at any point, feel free to type them in the chat and we'll be sure to answer them after.
Yeah, sounds good. All right, I wish I met you all personally, but this is the closest thing we can get to me meeting you all. But hopefully, you know, the stuff I'll talk about today will help you all. Let me just share my screen. I'm guessing you guys can see it.
Yep, you're good.
Okay, sick. So today I'm going to talk about design, all different kinds of design, but most important to me is how design is is one of the key factors of changing the world and pretty much creating the future. Designers are very much the leaders of the world right now. Before I begin and just talk a little bit about myself, so my name's Taha Hussein. I've worked at a few different places over the years. I'm actually still finishing up school, but I started by interning at this place called Conrad. They're a digital agency in Toronto, and they have offices in New York and Vancouver, and at a company called Palantir, Facebook. And then over the last, this is the place I interned at, and over the last year as well, I worked at Weno, which is another agency, Snapchat, and then now I'm starting a studio of my own, which is called Daybreak. All right, so I'm currently studying in a program called YSDN. It's like a joint program between York University and Sheridan College. You guys might have heard about it, but unfortunately the program doesn't exist anymore. Each one of these programs, universities and colleges have their own kind of program now. So if you go into York, it's gonna have its own interaction program. Sheridan has its own interaction program. You can't really go wrong between these two. They're really like one of the top tier design schools out there. So when I was in high school, I was always trying to figure out like, okay, like what should I do for the rest of my life? Like it's really hard to be told as a teenager, like, yo, like figure out what you're gonna do. This is the thing you're gonna spend most of your time doing. And you're like, I don't even know. I'm just barely trying to survive, but now I have to figure out what I'm gonna do for the rest of my life. It's a very difficult thing to figure out. And one of the most important lessons that I learned was passion isn't inherent. It comes from being deeply invested in something. And when you're a teenager or when you're early in your career, it's easy to think that, oh, like I should be loving what I do already. But it doesn't really work that way. It really comes from spending a lot of time doing what you do. And over time, as you get better at it, as you spend that time, you actually end up loving it more. So in the end, it's always going to be a leap of faith. And no matter how much you think you love something, or no matter how much how unsure you are, it's entirely okay, because you can never really be 100% sure. And if you really want to end up loving it, you just have to spend a lot of time doing it, being invested in it, learning, getting better, and then everything else just comes along the way. This is me in my first year, and I kind of like highlighted myself on the bottom left there. And I was like, okay, like everyone was super young and everyone has like bright faces, and over the years we've gone through a lot, so we don't look as happy anymore. But for me, what I learned about once I got into a design program was I learned about all the different kinds of design. There's obviously motion design, graphic design, many different kinds. But specifically, what I want to talk about is UI design, UX design, and what product design is. So I go by the term product designer. I call myself a UI UX designer, but I'll break it down into how that works. So UI design is specifically focused on how good something looks, how you can make it look pretty. You just focus on the visuals itself. UX design is called user experience design. You're focused on how nicely it works, how comfortable it is. Anytime something doesn't work, it's super frustrating, especially when you really want to do something, especially when it's important. I'm learning this like with all the stuff we use for school, like Moodle and whatnot. It's like infuriating how bad it is sometimes. Like you just want to do something, you just want to study, but it's really hard to download a file, or you have to do something. And all that stuff is the goal of a UX designer. You really want to make sure that you really think that through, because when someone's using it, you want to make sure that they can do what they want to do. Okay, the final part is a product design. So product design is specifically focused on the product aspect, which is pretty much you spend your time thinking. That's mostly what you do. You spend up thinking about, okay, why should we create it? A lot of these high level questions of what are we trying to make? Why are we trying to make it? Is it something that's going to be useful? What kind of features should we have? Why should we have those features? Who are we making this for? Now, sometimes you do that as a UI UX designer, but as a product designer, you're almost at the level of like a kind of like a CEO, or you're like a high level manager who's thinking about like, okay, why are we going to make this in the first place? What is our business goals and everything else? So generally in design, you will either master all these three verticals or specialize in one. So if you work at some place like Google, you'll most probably just do visual design, most probably do interaction design, most probably do product thinking, which is why I probably wouldn't recommend you work at Google when you first start off in general. What you really want to do is master all these three parts, because once you do, you can go anywhere you want. Specializing is good, but in this case, in design in general, you can actually do all three. So visual design, understanding the UI part, interaction design, understanding the experience part, and product thinking is a third vertical, which is called the product part. In general, throughout your entire career, these are the three areas you'll be assessed at. If you want to do an internship at Facebook, if you want to get a job at any agencies, they're always going to be looking at these three things. and to try and check them off. Like, okay, how good is this person in visual design? How good is this person in interaction design? So make sure you understand these 3 areas and make sure you try to learn of these 3 areas if possible. And if you just love doing one more than the other, then you can always specialize and just focus on doing that. So as a case study, let me show you like something I worked on pretty much over the last 2 months. It just launched. It's this little thing called Snacks. And the way it ended up starting out was actually through TikTok. So I spent a lot of time on TikTok, probably a little bit more than I should. And I was watching TikToks and all of a sudden my For You page is like, has a lot of these duets, like people just duetting stuff and like kind of reacting to it and building on top of it, changing to it, or maybe like sometimes saying something additional to that. And that was kind of interesting to me, like the fact that instead of watching the actual video itself, people want to watch someone reacting to a video, and sometimes the reaction itself has a lot more views than TikTok. And the other part was like me and my sister co-watching TikToks. The way that works is that sometimes my sister will come in my room and like, yo, like watch this TikTok, and we're like, yo, this is hilarious as hell, and we're just like, crying our eyes out from how funny it is. And that was super interesting to me. Like, oh, like it's really nice to have like someone like share like a piece of video to someone, and then be like, yo, what do you think? And just kind of seeing each other's reactions. And then I kind of compare that to DMs, and I realized that, oh my God, like DMs suck. Like, I don't know if you guys use Instagram DMs or Snapchat DMs or any kind of DMs in general. You just go like, yo, like you said something that's super funny. And then all the person does is go like, lol, lamau, like crying emoji or something like that. Like it's so like anticlimactic to like see that. And it's like, yo, I just said something the funniest thing in the world. And like, I don't even know how this person is reacting. So it literally, to me, it was like super sad because I'm not around a lot of my friends, and I'm always sending them TikToks or almost sending them like really funny stuff. And all I get is like a lamau. And I'm like, okay, like, well, whatever, really, is that the best you can do? So I started sketching stuff out, and this is some of these I've done, like probably shouldn't look at it in too much detail, but really like a lot of it is just thinking. I'm just thinking about like this idea, this problem space, like trying to figure out like, what is it that I'm trying to do? What is the problem here? Like, how can I actually make a solution for this? And then I started like putting things together. So it initially started off as a way to like, oh, what would it look like if I could just react to something with my friends, but at any time I want? Kind of like an Instagram DM. When you send a DM to someone, they don't have to open it right away. Like they might be busy on something, they might be studying. They'll open it when they have a chance, and then they'll respond to you. I was interested in that. There's a lot of like live chat things like Zoom, like Airtime, House Party. Like a lot of them are about like, let's do a video call together. I was interested in that. I'm like, I don't care about video calls. Like there's so many video calls out there. I can always jump on a call with my friends through any group chat system, right? I was interested in a way to be able to react to something, watch something with a friend, but at any time we want. And I can always see their reactions, kind of like a DM, but like a visual reactionary based one. So this is the UI part. So I'm like now focusing on the UI part. So previously all this stuff is product thinking, right? I'm thinking about a very broad problem space and trying to figure out like, okay, maybe I can make a product out of this, like a digital product. And then a lot of this time is trying to figure out what this digital product is going to be. And then you figure out like where those pieces are going to go. So more UI design, I'm trying to figure out, okay, how big should the reactions be? Like, should you be able to send it to Snapchat really easily? Should you be able to add friends really easily? Like, where should all these things go? I'm trying to figure all that out. Then this is like more UX design. So me trying to figure out like, how does the onboarding look like when people first start off? So I want to teach people how to use the product. We need permissions for the camera, for the microphone, for notifications, for contacts, all the stuff. How do we get that? Excuse me. So, and then more UI design. So we ended up calling it Snacks because they're like snack-sized videos, and you can watch them with your friends at any time. And then the idea was like, oh, it could be so cute. We could have like all these different kinds of snacks, like cookies, like donuts, and like cupcakes. And then we explore a few different icons for like what that could be. And then some user testing. So once we make first build, so on the bottom right is the CEO, and on the left is someone we're testing with, who's in like university or just generally a young audience. We show them the app like, hey, this is like a very broken build, but like let's kind of show this to you and like, let me know what you think. And we'll test it with them, see what they're thinking, see what they're saying. Sometimes they'll be like, yeah, I don't really know how this one's working, or they're confused. This is a very humbling moment because you learn a lot about like how your design might not actually work and how it can be a lot better. So and then, second part is like building on top of it. So I realized that social part is really important, like being able to see how your friends are, like who are your friends, who's watching you, who you're watching back. So People really generally care about followers. Like I think this is about close friends in general, but people care about followers. So pretty much I was focused on really easy way to be able to see, okay, like who's following me, but I'm not following them. Who am I following that's not following me back, and who's following each other. So all that stuff you can really easily do. And I like the idea of like creating this circle, like a group circle around you that you can be able to see all these are all my friends. And then this is who I see in my feed. So this just pretty much shipped like last week Friday, and this week Friday we shipped this one. So initially friends didn't exist when we first put it out into the world last Friday, and then now that exists. And next week Friday is probably going to be another addition to the app. So if you have an iPhone, so it's only in the App Store, you guys can download it and check it out. There's actually a message button somewhere in there where you can give me feedback and like, oh, like I think this part is kind of broken. It'd be nice to have this kind of feature, and then I'll for sure see it. Like it'll come to me, and then I can always like use that feedback to make it better. But a lot of this whole process is kind of like what you do as a designer, like looking at problem spaces, things that interest you, and then just making something out of it. And through that process, you're gonna learn a lot of things. Okay, so through this, what you'll realize is that pretty much designing for digital world is a huge responsibility. And generally, here's why. You're going to be spending a lot of time. I think with COVID stuff, we've been spending a lot of time at our homes. And we've also been spending a lot of time online, on Discord, on Snapchat, on TikTok. And just as an indoor designer or interior designer would focus on how to make your home more friendly to you. You know, if you're putting a poster up in your room, you're like an interior designer designing a room and making it comfortable to you. And product designers focused on the equivalent of that in a digital space, except instead of it being you, it's like millions of people, if not like billions of people, like there's a lot of people that's gonna be using that. So you have to make sure that what you're making is in the end, like it's gonna be really helpful for people and people are gonna love it. Even if it's not 100% perfect, even if it's kind of frustrating at times, it's driven by those ideas that you're aware of what you're making. So that's something to keep in mind. And then moving on is that product designers are very much in control in running all the products that you see and use. So Snapchat is run by product designers. So at the very top of Snapchat generally are 12 product designers, not really people with MBAs and business degrees. It's actually product designers that spend a lot of time figuring out what the next evolution of Snapchat is going to be. And these product designers report directly to the CEO. Like they work directly with Evan Spiegel to figure out what the next evolution of Snapchat is going to be. So that's something super important to keep in mind, especially because as you focus on this thing, you're going to be realizing that, whoa, like I have the keys to make anything that I want, but you have to make sure that the thing that you're making is actually really helpful for people. All right, moving on, going back to my life. So when I was in university, I was trying to figure out like, okay, like I don't know exactly what I'm going to do. I don't know exactly where I'm going to go. And something that I learned was when I was early in my career, I never took art classes in high school. I never took any creative classes in our high school. So it was a very last minute decision for me to go into university. So when I was applying to internships, I ended up applying to any big name internships ever because I was like, I don't think I'm that good. You know, I don't think I'm actually going to get in. But my friend was the one who was like, oh, you should apply. Like you can get in. Like what are you going to lose anyways? And I did, and I ended up getting the internship. And what I learned from the process is that you should never be the person that doubts yourself. Like there's always going to be people along the way that's going to be like, that's going to doubt you, at least to some extent. They're not going to think you're good enough, or they're not going to think you're up for it. You should never be that person. Like even if you yourself are objectively thinking that I think I can do better, that's entirely okay. But you should always go for opportunities that you think you're not qualified for, because in the end, what matters most is what you learn from it. So that's pretty much what I learned. And then, after that, I went into another internship at a place called Palantir. They're a tech company in Silicon Valley. First time, going somewhere else to do an internship. It was super fun. Being a Canadian was very much my brand. Like this was my table. I came back from an offsite and came back. My whole table was literally a Canadian flag. And then within the Canadian flag are actually pictures of my manager. And obviously Batman has a picture of a manager attached to it as well. It was super, super fun. I learned so much. I traveled to a lot of places for work. But one thing I learned really quickly was this something called Dunner-Kruger effect. I think it's pretty much called the Kruger effect. And what it is that when you first start off, you're like, you think you're good. Like, so red one is like a typical example. You start to think you're good. And this happens to everyone, because at one point you're going to learn a lot. You're going to think, I'm getting better. I think I know what I'm doing. But there's always a humbling moment where you're surrounded by someone super talented, or you join a place that's like really good. And from it, you realize that, okay, you know what? I know nothing. I'm like total crap. Like I'm so bad at what I do. And then over time, you actually get better. Like you actually get better. Um, and then that's where you go, like, I think I know what I'm good at, and I know what I'm bad at, and here's how I can get better. My graph is more like the black one. Like I never really thought I was good. I just like, I think I'm okay, and then I realized I'm not even okay. And then, you know, just like my confidence just goes down to negative, and then eventually, like I work myself up. The most important thing to know about it is that you should really focus on how you can get better. You should be self-aware. You should understand where your weaknesses are, where your strengths are, and then be focused on how you can get better on your weaknesses, and even like make your strengths even stronger. So after that, after a pound internship, I came back. I was like, okay, I need to really figure myself out. I feel like I should get a lot better. Like, how can I learn? How can I improve my skills? And it's pretty hard because I feel like school is actually not enough for you to teach that. A lot of it is self-learning. The good thing about the internet is that you can learn pretty much anything that you want. Like you can search up anything, you'll find all these resources. So as long as you're, motivated enough, you should be able to learn. So that's what I did. I was like always searching stuff. I was reading articles and always making stuff as well to apply what I was learning. Put that together in a portfolio. My first, like, I think this is my first portfolio that I finally started to feel good about. Put a lot of effort into it. And after that, I learned a lot about what portfolio should be, iterating on that. So your portfolio should never stay constant. It's always changing. Some people like make a portfolio, then like forget about it, they're like never looking at it again. So I would definitely focus on making sure, hold on, I think someone is trying to enter, okay. Yeah, so your portfolio should show what you like to do and what you've done that you're proud of. So it should do both. Sometimes you might like to do something that you like doing, but then you actually end up doing something that you're proud of. It's entirely okay. Just make sure you show both stuff that you've done and then what you're proud of. Okay, never stop learning. That's the other part. So I mentioned this before, like as you do things, as you're making a portfolio, make sure it's not constant. You're growing as a person and you should be growing as a person. So everything around you should evolve as well. Okay, and then I did my Facebook internship, was in the privacy team. I loved it. It was really awesome. I feel like this most important team as part of Facebook. Learned a lot about the process. I started to feel a little bit better about my skills. I had a really good understanding of what my strengths were and where my weaknesses were coming out of it. But again, like these bigger things that I've learned were always not specifically to design. And a big thing here was not chasing money or clout. And people in tech are in some ways always attached to these two things. Either they're clout driven or they're money driven or they're both. And typically when someone comes from Facebook or someone comes from Google, kind of like a big tech internship, they have like a chip on their shoulders. They're acting like they're somewhat big. Everything they wear is like a Google merch or something like that. I remember like having a friend that's like, literally every single part of them was about coming from Google. Like they were like, the Instagram somehow mentioned Google. Everything they wore was Google. Their laptop was Google. I'm just like, how can your entire personality be a company? Like that is the most boring person you could be. So never have a chip on your shoulder. When you do these things, you're doing this to learn, you're doing things to make stuff. And these companies are just a means for you to do that, right? So not focus on these higher level things. And ironically, the best part about it is that money and cloud and everything else will come along with it. So when you're focused on learning and focused on making stuff for yourself, and because of your self-interest, not because of these things, all these things will actually end up coming to you. And you're just a much more interesting person in general. People will actually like hanging out with you. Okay, and then I ended up, once I started put to my portfolio, I started like get a little bit more known, and I ended up working at a place called Voyage. It was super fun. I built a product with them which allows people to connect their autonomous vehicles. It's like this thing that tells you what the car is seeing, and then in any edge case scenarios, what you can do is you can quite literally take over an autonomous car that's like far away from you. It's almost like a remote control, like RC car, except it's like an actual car and there's people inside. It was super fun. There's all these different states that this car goes through. Learning about all those complexities was super fun. Work with Snapchat. This is a pending of whether the world's going to see this sometime next year. It's a pretty long project. Hopefully the world does, but it's been a lot of fun. And what I learned through this process as a whole is that when I was in the earlier years of my university, I would spend forever, like quite literally forever, just looking at the dream places for me. Like I would love to work here, I would love to work there. And Weno was an agency that was one of those places I really wanted to work at, but they never really hired a new grad designer, just a normal designer. It was always a senior designer or a design director. I think that's still the case, actually. And I would always look up their job opportunities pretty much every week. Every week I'd be like, okay, like, do they have a new job? Like, are they looking for more designers? I want to work here so bad. Like, and then I did that for like almost a year because I want to work here so bad. But eventually I just, completely forgot about this agency, and I was working on myself, working on a portfolio, working on all these projects that I was interested in. And through that, like, my word kind of got out through mutuals. And in general, design industry is very, very small. It's much smaller than you think. You're gonna see everyone at one point in your life. Like, I'm pretty sure I'll see a bunch of you in the design industry a couple years from now, and it's gonna be like, yo, Taha, like I heard you do a talk and it was kind of boring. I was falling asleep, but it kind of helped me make my decision. And then I'll probably see you sometime, and we're probably gonna collab sometime. So as you just focus on making stuff, eventually everything will fit into place. And what happened with me was when instead of me doing searching for job opportunities and applying, it actually turned around. It was exactly the other way, where instead of me applying for job opportunities now, they started coming to me. So when it came to me, they're like, yo, work with us on a special project. It's a tight deadline, but we need someone that's like knows what they're doing. I feel like I don't know what I'm doing. I still don't know if I know what I'm doing, but I was like, what? Like, I can't believe like when it was actually hitting me up. And this was a huge lesson for me because I learned a lot about chasing opportunities versus opportunities coming to you. Eventually, opportunities will come to you if you're focused on mastery and you're focused on getting better. And all the great designers that I know, they're always super busy. They're always like, have so much going on, have so many projects going on. And the biggest question that I had was like, why is there such a huge disparity between some of my friends that are struggling to get a job? They graduated, they've been applying to a bunch of places, they can't seem to get hired anywhere, versus my friends that are like exact opposite. They have a bunch of opportunities. They're dying because they overcommit themselves. They keep having to say no. And I realized that a lot of it was like, on the left side, you have my friends that are struggling to get a job, and that's because they were not entirely focused on mastery. Like, they would do some stuff because they enjoyed it. They would do some stuff because they felt like it. But almost not always was it about getting better. While my friends on the right, the people that always have a job and everything just comes to them, is because they always did stuff because they wanted to get better. They always focused on learning a new skill. Oh, this is a problem space I never focused on. Oh, this is an area that I wasn't really interested in before, and then learn about it now. Let me learn about this. Oh, maybe I should pick up more visual design stuff, or maybe I should pick up some 3D, or maybe I should pick up some code. Like, I was focused on learning new things and trying new things. And because of that, they've just become a really, really strong designer and a person, really, by the time they graduated. And other opportunities started coming to them because their work really, really ended up becoming stellar. So these are stuff that I'm learning. Daybreak pending, hopefully. So I'm working on. We're in very early stages. It's pretty much me and my friends, just like the product that you saw today. We're just working on some really, really fun stuff together, making stuff, putting it out into the real world, and then sharing it. Along the ways, things that I've learned: don't prove yourself with where you work. Do it with your work. And people always say that in design. They're always like, but Todd, I want to like prove myself. Like, I want to show that I know what I'm doing, or at least to myself personally, I want to prove to myself that at least I am good at what I do. And they want to do that with where the works. They want to find some companies that are hard to get into or have some clout attached to that. You never need to do that. Your work will speak things that where you work will never will. And this is super important because people will sometimes go to pick up all these opportunities because all they care about is how to look at to others. But when you're focused on your work itself and how your work speaks, all these opportunities, everything's going to work itself out. So something to really keep in mind is this point here, is you're going to feel this as you get into your careers. No matter where you are in your career, at some point you're going to feel like, maybe I should be at a higher position. Maybe I should be a senior by now. Maybe I should do this by now. Most important thing is you just focus on making stuff. And the good thing about being a product designer and being in design in general is that your resume doesn't really matter in general. Your resume doesn't really matter. I almost never look at resumes when I'm thinking of like, oh, I need a new product design in the studio. I always start with the portfolio. I hired someone very recently that never did any product stuff, but their portfolio showed that they're really good visual design skills, interaction design skills. So I just hired them, and very quickly they were able to do the product work. And in the end, it didn't really matter. It didn't really matter what their resume was like, what experience they had. Your portfolio is just the keys to everything. Your work is, by extension, your key to everything. So when you do great work, you will always get the job that you want to get. You always get to places that you want to go. Yes, pretty much what I talked about. Surround yourself with people with dreams like yours, and this is really important. As you get more focused, as things go better for you, and you'll start to notice a differentiation between you and your friends. Like you might lose some of your friends, and that happens in high school, and that's going to happen in uni probably. It's going to happen after you graduate, and it's because generally people that are focused will end up hanging out together, and people that are not will hang out with people that are not focused on what they want to do. Don't be alarmed by it. I think it's a really good thing. And make sure you always cut down your circle as well. Sometimes if you're hanging out with people that are like always kind of don't really know exactly what they're doing, but always will bring other people down, you don't want to hang out with those. Hang out with people that are always like working on something. They always want to make something, and they're just having fun, just in life, but also with what they're doing in general. And they're always have like, I don't know, like some kind of light in their eyes. They're like, okay, like I want to make this thing, I want to make that thing, and in the end, all that stuff ends up working together and you're gonna have so much more fun. Like I'm living the dream in the sense that I'm working with my friends on the things that I want to make, on what they want to make. And my friend is the one that illustrated the app icon for snacks, and I was the one that did the design. And then I have another friend that's working on some of the other parts, and we're all just jamming together. And all those connections that I made were just from school itself. I was like, oh, these people are good. I want these guys to be my friends, and I want to hang out with them because just being around them motivates me. Design is a creative endeavor as much as a logical one. It's super important to know this one because it can get really easily become like a super logical one, analytical one. We're just focused on, I want to make this as perfectly as possible, as clean as possible, and I want to make sure it has the highest number of all these metrics that you want to track, like engagement, retention, all those fancy stuff. You just want to focus on those. You want to make sure it's as easy as possible. You'll forget that it's still a creative endeavor. Like it's still a creative approach. If you ever been to a hospital, every time I go in a hospital, I'm literally depressed. I'm sick, and I'm even more sick now because I go there and everything is like gray, because in their eyes, the designer's probably like, no color. Color is like emotion, and why would we do emotions in the hospital? The goal is to be as clean and as clinical as possible. And you go in there and you're just like sad. Everything is like so sad in there. Most hospitals, at least, I said the one I've been to. And I was like, wow, like this could really use some life. So make sure the things that you make, there's some life into them. Put that into it. Make sure that you're a little bit creative. You're enjoying it as an art form as well. All right, be nice. This is another one that I've learned. This is so important because there's always drama happening. There's always some hot tea in high school. People are like talking about like, oh, this happens, this person get into volleyball team. Oh my God, this person and that person fought on the basketball team. Like that happens in high school. That happens in university as well. You want to avoid drama. Like it's okay if you like gossip and stuff sometimes, but don't be the person that's causing drama, and don't be the person that's middle of it, and don't be the person that's ever rude or hurt someone else. And I'm surprised I have to say this, but every year there's always some kind of situation with every cohort of designers or every cohort of students. They have something going on. I've firsthand seen people that didn't get jobs because they were rude to someone. This one time, they were just rude and completely a butthole, and then end up getting some kind of reputation around like, oh, this person was completely rude and for no reason at all, right? Maybe she was having a bad day and she felt like being rude to another designer. The issue is that soon enough, that person you were rude to will either get a job at a place you want to work at, or two, will know people that works at a place you want to work at. And it does not work out because you're going to go through the job interview process. You might kill it. You might be an incredible designer, but you will not get a job because your reputation, internally, your reputation just became of someone that's not fun to work with. So be nice, be fun to work with, and don't be a butthole. Okay. Resources, some quick stuff. So some things that helped me along the way. Designers Fund, you'll see this. You might see this, you might have known about this already, but generally they're like a VC firm. They're like, they invest in other companies, but they also use design to help them out. They have a lot of good resources on design. You can read them out. UX Collective, you've probably seen UX Collective before. If you haven't, you can also learn about it. There's a bunch of essays. Every year they do something called trends. So if you search up like trends UX Collective, you'll see like what are the trends in 2020 or what are the trends for 2021. Like most of them are like kind of helpful, sometimes not, but when you first start off, there's a lot of really helpful articles there. Google Design, they have a lot of really informative articles to write about. Their podcast is helpful as well. My favorite podcast of all time that's design related is called Design Details. This podcast really helped me all through university. I still listen to it. I've listened to it for years. You can skip some of the parts if you want to. If you search it up on Google, you'll see the website, and somewhere on there they'll say start with these episodes. So I'd start with those episodes before you get into like the latest episodes. But these are, I think one of them is a designer from GitHub, one of the designers at Google, and just both talk about design every week. It's like two people having tea and talking about something that interests them, but you'll be surprised how much you're going to learn because they're experienced designers. So they talk about all these things that are really important. If you want to learn visual design, I'd recommend listening to their visual design episode. They have one. And if you're interested in broad design as well, just listen to them talk about it. They do a much better job at explaining things than me. They probably will actually teach you a lot more, specifically when it comes to nitty-gritty details. So I'll check them out. That should be it. Like I know that was a super informal, really quick, broad chat, but I really feel like you can always learn things online as much as possible. There's a lot of good resources out there. But I think the most important things that helped me throughout my career and throughout my life were those really broader things that I talked about, the higher level things, because you can always slowly become a better designer or you can get a job, but really what matters is how you live your life and things that, what are those systems and patterns that's guiding those. So really keep an eye on that. Really keep an eye on those, what are those principles and values that's driving you to design and what's driving you into getting a job, why you care about getting a job, all that stuff. Make sure you keep an eye out for that. You guys can follow me on Twitter. If you ever want to message me or like email me, you're interested in Facebook, you're interested in anything else, feel free to also send me an email. I'm always down to chat, always down to help someone out. All right, y'all, that should be it for me. Were there any questions or anything? You guys can drop it in the chat, and I think we're going to be answering those to the chat, right?
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for that lovely presentation. It was really insightful. First, there's a couple questions. First was, what does a portfolio consist of, and what are some tools you recommend for starting one? I think the second question was already slightly answered, but yeah.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So a portfolio, the most important part it should have is like your best work. It should always have your best work, and also depends on the type of job you want to have. So if you want to have a visual design, just visual design job, you don't want to do product work, you should focus on showing really good visual work. If you just want to do a product design or UI UX, then you should show those three core verticals I talked about, which is visual design, interaction design, and product thinking. You want to show that across your portfolios and across your case studies. Make sure you show really good visual work, explain how you made your decisions, and then explain what drove you to solve this problem. And then the last thing about a portfolio is that it's a personality. I think a lot of portfolios can really be made to be boring, or they're just very, very, like just reading them in general is like, I'm not really interested in this person. So show your personality in there. Like, what do you like? What do you do in your free time? What do you enjoy? What type of person are you? This can be done, both in your about page, but also in your aesthetic in general. So when you're focused on how it looks, maybe you like illustration, maybe you like art, like you can always integrate those. For me, it was 3D design. I really enjoy 3D. I really enjoy motion work. So what I really did was I combined those interests to make my portfolio. So I did a lot of 3D design, I did some motion design, some edgy stuff because I like edgy design. It was like, so that was part of my portfolio. So I would recommend that. What are some tools to recommend for starting one? So if you're interested in doing an online website, I would definitely recommend doing it online instead of just having a PDF. There's some really good website builders out there. I think some easy ones are Wix, Squarespace. Those are like super easy ones. I use Webflow for mine. It's a little bit harder to use, but once you learn it, you can do anything you want with it, which is why I chose that.
All right, thank you. And so the next question was, how can you develop your eye for good design? So like, is it more of a practice makes perfect thing, or should you already have kind of a good sense on your own?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really great question. And especially for me, I wasn't really creative or like design centric all throughout high school. So when I went to university, I really quickly learned that visual design was my worst skill by far. I was not good at understanding what made something good. The good thing is that it's generally what you want to be is somewhat analytical. So when you look at something that you do like, that's pretty, always ask why that is. Now, it could be generally anything, right? It could be a car, it could be your mouse, it could be your iPad. Everything is designed. Literally everything is designed. It could be a specific chair. You can ask like, what are those principles? Like, why did the designer make it this way? And why does it look good to me? The second part is like uh, practice. Like when you look at something that's beautiful, it's been helpful to make something, being inspired by it and making something out of it. Personally, when I would look at online like inspiration sites, maybe Pinterest or maybe Dribble or Behance, I would spend a lot of time just dissecting it. Like, okay, like which one, why did they make this decision? Like, why is a type this big? And I would like pretty much tear apart every little aspect of it. So I would look at, the type is 48 pixels here, 24 pixels here. Like I was that analytical about it. And then I kind of learned like, okay, they're using the hierarchy really nicely. And that's why it looks so good to me. And then I would go and then I would do it at night, or like I would have a side project where I just start playing around and applying all those things that I looked at and I learned and put that into my work.
All right, that sounds awesome. So the next question is more academics related, and it was, which courses or programs did you take in university?
Yes. So I generally had an earlier idea that I wanted to do product design, but I took courses on motion design because I wanted to pick that up as well, and then obviously product design stuff like user research, anything related to UI, UX. Like I picked every single course related to those, and then I also picked courses that were like coding. I picked up coding as well, and coding is really hard for a designer. Like if you're a visual person, you try to do coding and you're looking at a bunch of lines of text, it's generally pretty difficult. But just learning at least a foundation is really helpful, because when you're going to build something, if I use snacks as an example, I make it, and then we want to build it. Like it's really, really helpful to be able to speak the language of a developer. And I can be like, oh, the padding should be this much more. The margin is off here. The sizing is off here. I can pretty much speak in their language and tell them what's wrong. And sometimes I can even help them out by going into the code and like polishing myself. So coding was another skill that I picked up throughout the process. Be open-minded as much as possible throughout university, because I don't think you'll learn everything that you want at university. You should be doing a lot of self-learning, but university is a way to try a bunch of different things and see what you like.
That was a great answer. And this next question is a little related, but it was actually, no, never mind. But since you made the choice to jump into design late into high school, how do you know it was the right choice at the time?
Oh, I really didn't. I thought I was making a mistake. My dad thought I was making a mistake. She's like, oh, are you sure you want to do this? And this is like 4 years ago. So it wasn't as established then. Like, I think more people generally know that UX design is a bigger field. But when I first was trying to go into it, I wasn't really sure it was the right decision. But it was my brother who told me like, hey, you're a creative person. Me and my older brother would make things together. So he was more like a software engineering type of person. Since we had someone to make the code, we needed someone to do the design parts of it. So I was like, okay, fine, I'll make an app icon for you. Okay, fine, I'll like make this UI thing for you. And then he said, hey, you should consider this as an actual career. But I was like, wait, what? Like, I've never been considered that. Like, not a creative person. Like, will I have a better job? I wasn't really sure. And it always goes back to that thing that I talked about before, was that it is always in general a leap of faith. Like you're not gonna know 100% that you're making the right decision, but as long as it broadly interests you, just give it a shot. And then you'll see that the more you do it, the more you'll learn, and the better you get, the more you love it.
That's definitely a good mindset. So there's a question that says, did you ever face imposter syndrome starting out? And if so, how did you overcome it?
Yeah, I face it right now. Honestly, at work, I'm still always facing it because when you're surrounded by talent, you always feel that. The general gist of it is that even if you doubt yourself, you don't feel like you belong, um, the best thing you can do in that situation is learn and like, okay, I might not be where I want to be. I'm gonna try my best. Um, and generally, like everyone knows this. Like no one really knows what they're doing. Like not all the time. Everyone's just figuring it out. Like no matter even your idols and your heroes, people you might look up to in the design industry, they're just figuring it out just as you are. And you always have to figure things out. So it's really easy to feel like, oh, I don't have everything figured out in my life yet, so I don't feel like I belong here. No one has anything figured out in their life, like in general. And that's the point of life. Like as you go through it, you'll learn things, you'll try things, you'll make mistakes. And the worst thing you can do is just doubt yourself and not put your full self into it because of that. So anytime you have your thoughts that are saying like, oh, like I don't belong here, or how did it even get here? Just tell yourself like it doesn't really matter. You're there. Now make the most of it.
All right, there's two more questions as of now. It was, how do you develop your own style?
Right. That's a good question. I think in the end, just to try a bunch of stuff and see what you like. So my style ended up evolving not from product design specifically, but from people outside of in other areas of design. So I said this before, I was interested in motion design. So I like this guy called Ash Thorpe. He's like a really, really high level motion designer. He did design for Blade Runner. He did design for a lot of these big movies. And he still does a lot of UI work and different kinds of like motion, fun, futuristic animated stuff everywhere. And his work ended up inspiring me. And I would, deconstruct his work a lot and try that stuff a lot. And eventually that became my style, but it's not constant, right? It's always evolving. Like I'm always on trying out some other stuff and thinking about like what's the next style I want to try out. So I'm not constant, but overall it will end up becoming naturally from the things that ended up interesting you.
That's a good process. And then there was, other than Webflow, what software, apps, or websites do you use when designing?
Right, good question. I use Figma for all my design stuff. So those screenshots I showed, that's all in Figma. I love Figma a lot. I use it for everything. I use Illustrator sometimes. I used to use Illustrator a lot before. Now I use it for like more iconography and things like that. Sometimes I use Photoshop if I want to like edit images a lot, stuff like that. But Figma is my go-to. When it comes to prototyping, I use something called Principle. That's one of those things I use. Sometimes I'll use Framer, which is a really strong prototyping tool. And then Origami. Origami is made by Facebook. I learned that when I was working there. It's a really powerful tool. So sometimes I'll use those for prototyping.
All right. And the last question was, what does your daily schedule look like as a product designer?
Okay. I feel like as an adult, you should have a really consistent daily schedule. My daily schedule isn't 100% consistent, even though I follow an overall structure. So for me, in general, the way it works is usually I'll have a bunch of meetings in the morning of every day or whichever day. Sometimes I'll clump my morning meetings together for the whole week into like one day. But generally, what those meetings are about is what are we going to make this week? What are we focused on, and why are we making it? What kind of problem spaces are we solving for? So I work with several different clients. So depending on which client I'm talking to, and which specific product I'm working on, I'll have a meeting dedicated to them, and we'll talk about like, oh, this is what we made this week. We're noticing that people are not going through onboarding. People don't feel comfortable sharing their face, or some product problems, or maybe it's a design problem or it's an interaction problem. I'll talk to them and I'll figure out, okay, like by the end of the week or by next week when we chat again, I'll have some designs to show and whatnot. Sometimes throughout the process, I'll also pull them in to get feedback on it. Most of the things I'm focused on generally for myself personally is like client stuff, so client work, and then my studio work. So I'm focused on like branding. I'm focused on the designers I'm working with, helping them out, making sure they're learning, they're growing throughout the process. And third one is personal work. So I always have personal work in there no matter what, no matter where I am. Like I'll do stuff just for fun, like no matter what I'm doing. So sometimes I'll do a personal project that's like making posters. Sometimes I'll do a personal project where I want to make an animation. Things that really give me, things that I really enjoy. It doesn't have to be like specifically design related. It can be like pottery or something, but I always want to do some kind of personal work because it keeps me creatively inspired.
All right, awesome. Oh, and just one more. Out of curiosity, what font did you use for your slides?
Yeah, it's called OGG, OGG. It's my favorite font. Like I got pretty much my entire university using that font. Like it's beautiful. It's a beautiful font, and it's really nice in italics, and it's regular one. I think it's a little expensive if you want to buy it, but I think it's 100% worth it. Like I used it for the last 4 years, and I still use it now. I'm trying to stop using it because anytime I use it, people be like, "Oh, it's a Taha thing." Like I have it on my site. I use it everywhere. And now I'm like, okay, I need to find another typeface I'm going to use for the next 4 years. But you guys should check it out. And if you want more type recommendations, feel free to hit me up as well. I have a bunch of ones that I really like.
All right, awesome, awesome. So I'm just going to share the screen again. So yeah, so thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much for attending the UI UX workshop, and thank you to Taha for speaking in the workshop and giving everyone a little bit of knowledge about your expertise. And to everyone who attended the workshop, all resources used in this workshop will be sent to you in an email. And as we put in the chat before, we will also be sending out a feedback form, so please fill those out to make our workshops even better. And once you get the slideshow in your email, feel free to click any of the icons below and check us out on our social media. So yeah, thanks again for everyone for attending the workshop, and see
Thanks,
you all
y'all.
later.